3 signatures. That was all it took for Richard Sterling to erase 7 years of marriage. He didn't look at the heart monitor. He didn't look at his wife's pale, sweating face. He definitely didn't look at her swollen belly where his own twin sons were fighting to survive. He just looked at his Cartier watch and checked the time. "It's just business, Ilara," he said, dropping the divorce papers on her ICU bed. "You're dying. I have a merger to close. Dead weight sinks ships." He thought she was gone. He thought the game was over. But he forgot one thing. Richard Sterling wasn't the only shark in New York City, and the man waiting in the shadows wasn't just coming for his business, he was coming for the family Richard threw away. This is the story of how a millionaire abandoned his family on a deathbed, and the billionaire rival who turned them into a dynasty. The sterile hum of the machines in the private suite at Mount Sinai Hospital was usually a comfort to the wealthy. It signified care, precision, and the best technology money could buy. But for Ilara Vance, the rhythmic beep, beep, beep sounded like a countdown. She was 32 years old, 7 months pregnant with twins, and according to the chart hanging at the foot of her bed, she had less than 3 weeks to live. A rare, aggressive autoimmune failure. That was what the specialist said. Her body was rejecting everything, nutrients, medicine, and soon, perhaps even the babies. The door hissed open. Ilara didn't turn her head. She knew the footsteps, heavy, confident, Italian leather striking the linoleum with the force of a gavel. "Richard," she whispered, her voice rasping. She hadn't had water in hours. Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Dynamics, and the man Ilara had loved since she was a 22-year-old intern, stood over her. He looked impeccable. His charcoal suit was pressed, his tie a perfect Windsor knot. He didn't look like a husband visiting his dying wife. He looked like a man about to acquire a distressed asset. "Ilara," he said. No honey, no darling, just her name, flat and cold. Did you see the doctor?" she asked, her hand drifting protectively over her stomach. "They said the twins. If we do an emergency C-section now, they might—" "I spoke to the legal team," Richard interrupted. Ilara blinked, confusion clouding her pain-filled eyes. "Legal? Richard, our sons." Richard pulled a sleek black folder from his briefcase and tossed it onto the blankets. It landed with a heavy thud against her legs. "These are divorce papers. Irreconcilable differences. Also a renunciation of assets." Ilara tried to sit up, but her strength failed her. She collapsed back against the pillows, gasping. "What? Richard, I'm dying. Why are you doing this now?" Richard walked to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. "Precisely because you are dying, Ilara. Sterling Dynamics is going public next quarter. Investors are skittish. A grieving widower is a sympathetic figure for a week, but a single father with 2 premature, likely special needs children? That's a liability. It projects instability." He turned back to her, his face a mask of indifference. "And then there's the medical debt. Your insurance cap was hit 2 days ago. The treatments Dr. Evans suggested, the experimental ones, they cost millions. If we are married, that debt falls on my estate. If we are divorced, it stays with you." Ilara felt the room spin. The cruelty was so precise, so calculated, it was breathtaking. "You're worrying about money? We have millions, Richard. You're leaving me. You're leaving your children to die? Over stock prices?" "I'm preserving the legacy," Richard corrected, checking his watch. "I've cut off the credit cards, Ilara. And I've instructed the hospital that I am no longer the guarantor for your stay. You'll be moved to the state ward within the hour. It's better this way. Quieter." "They are your sons," she screamed, the monitor spiking rapidly. "Are they?" Richard sneered. "You've been sick for months. Weak. Who knows who you let into this bed while I was in Tokyo closing the Anderson deal?" It was a lie. He knew it was a lie. But he needed to villainize her to justify the abandonment to his own conscience. He leaned down, his cologne, sandalwood and expensive scotch, filling her nose, making her nauseous. "Sign the papers, Ilara, or don't. It doesn't matter. My lawyers have already filed for emergency separation based on your mental incapacity. Goodbye." He didn't touch her. He didn't kiss her forehead. He simply turned, walked out the door, and the hiss of the automatic seal sounded like a guillotine dropping. Ilara Vance was alone. She closed her eyes, tears leaking into her hairline as the first sharp contraction of stress-induced labor ripped through her body. 20 minutes later, the humiliation began. A nurse Ilara didn't recognize came in, looking apologetic but firm. She wasn't one of the private concierges. She was general staff. "Mrs. Sterling, surely Miss Vance?" the nurse stammered. "We've received a notification from the billing department. The private suite is no longer authorized. We need to transfer you to the general ward." "I'm in labor," Ilara gasped, clutching the bed rail. "I can feel them." "The general ward has doctors too," the nurse said, avoiding eye contact. "Please, we need this room. There's a VIP incoming." They began to unlock the wheels of her bed. Ilara felt like a piece of discarded furniture. The hallway was cold. The lights were too bright. Richard had stripped her of her dignity, her home, and now her safety. As they wheeled her toward the service elevator, the one used for laundry and garbage, to avoid disturbing the other wealthy patients, a commotion erupted at the nurse's station. "I don't care what the protocol is," a voice boomed. It wasn't loud, but it carried a resonance that stopped the entire floor. It was a baritone voice, smooth like velvet, but hard like granite. "You will tell me where she is." Ilara's vision was blurring, but she recognized that voice. Everyone in New York recognized that voice. The elevator doors were opening when a hand slammed against the metal, stopping them from closing. Standing there was Julian Thorne. If Richard Sterling was a millionaire, a man of new money and aggressive tactics, Julian Thorne was a billionaire. He was the heir to the Thorne steel legacy, a man whose family had built the skeletons of the skyscrapers Richard merely rented offices in. He was dark-haired, 6'3", with eyes the color of a stormy sea. He was also Richard's sworn enemy. They had rivaled in business school, rivaled for market share, and rivaled for the cover of Forbes. Julian looked down at Ilara. He took in the cheap hospital gown, the tears, the terror in her eyes, and the nurse trying to push the bed into the service elevator. His jaw tightened so hard, a muscle feathered in his cheek. "Mr. Thorne," the nurse squeaked, "we were just moving a critical patient via the garbage elevator." Julian finished, his voice dangerously calm. "Is this how Mount Sinai treats the vulnerable now?" "Her funding was cut," the nurse explained, terrified. "Mr. Sterling, he cancelled the payments." Julian didn't look at the nurse. He looked at Ilara. For a moment, the steel in his eyes melted. He reached out and took her cold, trembling hand. His grip was warm, solid, an anchor in the storm. "Richard left you?" Julian asked softly. Ilara could only nod. He said I was a bad investment." A dark, terrifying laugh escaped Julian's lips. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the sound of a predator spotting prey. "Step away from the bed," Julian commanded the nurse. "Sir, I can't." "I said step away," Julian snapped. He pulled out a black card, the Centurion, the real one, and held it up. "Transfer Mrs. Vance back to the suite." "No, not that suite. The presidential wing. I want Dr. Holloway. the head of neonatal, and Dr. Chen, the best oncologist in the state, in her room in 10 minutes. "Who is paying for this?" the charge nurse asked, rushing over, sensing the power shift. "I am," Julian announced, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear, "and put it under the Thorn Foundation. If Richard Sterling asks, tell him his wife is no longer his concern. She's mine." He grabbed the railing of the bed himself, ignoring his tailored suit, and began to wheel Ilara back toward the light, away from the service elevator. "Why?" Ilara whispered, looking up at him. "Why are you doing this, Julian? You hate Richard." Julian looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "I hate Richard, yes. But I have never hated you, Ilara. And I never leave a debt unpaid." "What debt?" "The one where you were the only person to send flowers when my sister died 3 years ago. Richard threw the invitation in the trash. You fished it out and sent a handwritten note." Ilara barely remembered that. It had been a small act of kindness in a life filled with Richard's dictates. "Rest now, Ilara," Julian said, as they entered the presidential suite, a room larger than Ilara's first apartment. "You focus on those babies. I'll focus on the war." As the doctors swarmed in, taking over with renewed urgency, funded by Thorn money, Ilara looked at Julian one last time before the anesthesia mask was lowered over her face for the emergency C-section. He was standing in the corner on his phone. "Get me the legal team," she heard him say. "And get a private investigator. I want to know exactly why Richard thinks she's dying, and find out everything he's been doing in the Cayman Islands. We're going to bury him." The twins were born at 11:42 p.m. 2 boys, small, fragile, but fighting with a ferocity that surprised the medical team. They were placed in the NICU, intubated, but stable. Ilara, however, was fading. 3 days later, she woke up in a haze. The room was filled with flowers, white lilies, orchids, roses. None were from Richard. Julian was sitting in a leather armchair by the window, reading a dossier. He looked tired. His tie was undone, his sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms. He hadn't left the hospital. "The boys?" Ilara asked, her voice a croak. "Leo and Orion," Julian said, standing up immediately. "I named them. I hope you don't mind. The nurses needed names for the charts. Leo for the lion's heart they have, and Orion for the hunter, because they're going to hunt down life and grab it." Ilara smiled weakly. "Leo and Orion. I love it." Then the reality hit her. "How much time do I have left, Julian? 2 weeks? 1? Julian's face darkened. He walked over to the bed and sat on the edge. He held a thick file in his hands. "Ilara, listen to me carefully. Dr. Chen ran his own tests. He didn't look at the files Richard's doctors provided. He started from scratch." Ilara's heart hammered. "And? You don't have glioblastoma. You don't have an autoimmune failure." "What?" Ilara tried to process the words. "But the symptoms, the weakness, the hair loss, the nausea." "Heavy metal poisoning," Julian said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Thallium. Small doses, administered over a long period. Just enough to mimic a wasting disease, but not enough to kill you instantly." The silence in the room was deafening. "He poisoned me," Ilara whispered, the horror settling in her bones colder than the hospital air. "Richard poisoned me?" "We found the traces in your hair follicles," Julian explained. "And my private investigator found a recurring purchase order from a shell company linked to Richard. Industrial cleaning supplies delivered to your private residence, but only signed for by him." Ilara felt sick. It wasn't just abandonment. It was attempted murder. "Why? Why not just divorce me?" "Because of the prenup," Julian said. "I read your marriage contract. If you divorce, you get 20% of his assets. If you die, he keeps everything, and he gets the sympathy vote to boost his IPO. He was slowly killing you to save his stock price. Ilara began to shake. Violent, uncontrollable tremors. She wasn't dying of a disease. She was dying of betrayal. Julian grabbed her shoulders, steadying her. Ilara, look at me. You are going to live. Dr. Chen has already started the chelation therapy. The poison is leaving your system. You're going to get strong. You're going to raise Leo and Orion. I can't, she sobbed. He's too powerful. He'll take them. He'll finish the job. He thinks you're dead, Julian said, a dangerous glint in his eye. I paid off the hospital admin to list you as deceased in the public records. A private obituary will be released tomorrow. As far as Richard Sterling knows, he won. Julian leaned in close, his eyes burning with a promise of retribution. Let him think he won. Let him launch his IPO. Let him celebrate. And while he's busy counting his money, you are going to recover in my estate in the Hamptons. We will raise those boys. And when the time is right, we will rise from the dead and take everything he has. 2 years later. The Hamptons estate of Julian Thorne was a fortress of glass and stone overlooking the Atlantic. It was here that Ilara Vance ceased to exist, and a new woman was born. She went by Elena Thorne now, posing as Julian's distant cousin to the few staff members allowed inside. Her hair had grown back, thick and lustrous. Her skin, once grey and papery, glowed with health. She spent her mornings in the gym, training with a Krav Maga instructor Julian had hired. She spent her afternoons learning forensic accounting, and she spent every other moment with Leo and Orion. The boys were 2 years old now, toddlers with messy curls and infectious laughs. They called Julian Papa J. It broke Ilara's heart and healed it at the same time. Julian wasn't just a benefactor. He was their father in every way that mattered. He taught them to swim. He read them bedtime stories, and he protected them fiercely. But the shadow of Richard Sterling still loomed. One evening, Ilara walked into Julian's study. The news was playing on the massive screen. Richard Sterling was being interviewed on CNN. He looked older, more haggard, but richer. Sterling Dynamics was now a Fortune 500 company. I miss my late wife every day, Richard was saying to the reporter, looking mournfully at the camera. She was the light of my life. Everything I do to honor her memory. Ilara picked up a crystal tumbler of whiskey from Julian's desk and threw it at the screen. It shattered, liquor dripping down Richard's digital face. Julian didn't flinch. He just looked up from his laptop. "You're ready?" he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm ready," Ilara replied. "He's announcing his engagement to the heiress, Isabella Vane, next week. The wedding of the century." Isabella Vane, Julian mused. Old money. She brings the political connections Richard lacks. If that marriage happens, he becomes untouchable. "Then we stop it," Ilara said. Julian stood up and walked over to her. The tension between them had been building for 2 years, a slow burn of mutual respect, shared trauma, and something deeper they were both afraid to name. "The Thorne Annual Gala is this Saturday," Julian said. "Richard is on the guest list. He wouldn't miss it. He needs to show off Isabella to the elite." "I know," Ilara said. "I want to be your date." Julian raised an eyebrow. "You know what will happen. The moment you step into that ballroom, the war starts. There is no going back to the shadows." Ilara stepped closer to him, fixing his collar. "I don't want the shadows anymore, Julian. I want the spotlight. I want him to see me. I want him to know that the ghost he created has come back to haunt him." Julian smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. Very well. I'll have the designers send over the dresses. Wear red, the color of war. The grand ballroom at the Plaza Hotel was a sea of black tuxedos and glittering diamonds. It was the social event of the season, the Thorne Foundation annual gala. Tickets were $50,000 a plate, and every power player in New York City was there. Richard Sterling stood near the ice sculpture, a glass of vintage Krug champagne in his hand. He looked every inch the titan of industry. His company, Sterling Dynamics, had just closed a merger with a Japanese tech giant. His stock was at an all-time high, and on his arm was Isabella Vane, the daughter of a senator, a woman whose pedigree was as impeccable as her diamonds. "You seem tense, Richard," Isabella murmured, adjusting the strap of her silver gown. "Relax, you own half the room." "I own the room," Richard corrected with a smirk, scanning the crowd. "I'm just looking for our host. Julian hasn't made an appearance yet. Typical. He likes to make people wait." "He's jealous," Isabella said dismissively. "You beat his earnings report this quarter. Thorne Steel is old news. Sterling Dynamics is the future." Richard kissed her cheek, a performance for the cameras flashing nearby. "You're right, darling. The past is dead. We are the future." Suddenly, the lights in the ballroom dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd of 500 guests. A spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the grand staircase at the far end of the hall. Julian Thorne stepped into the light. He looked devastating in a midnight blue tuxedo, his face sharp and serious. He didn't smile. He gripped the microphone stand with both hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian's voice boomed, echoing off the gilded ceiling. "Thank you for joining me tonight. For years, the Thorne Foundation has supported the vulnerable. But tonight, we are not just raising money. We are raising the truth." Richard chuckled softly to Isabella. "Here comes the sermon. He's so self-righteous." "Tonight," Julian continued, his eyes locking directly onto Richard Sterling across the room, "I want to introduce you to my new partner. A woman of extraordinary resilience. A woman who survived the impossible. Please welcome the CEO of the newly formed Phoenix Holdings, Ms. Elara Vance." Richard froze. The glass of champagne slipped from his fingers. It didn't shatter. It hit the carpet with a dull thud, spilling golden liquid over his polished shoes. But he didn't notice. He couldn't breathe. Elara Vance. The name bounced around the room in whispers. Wasn't that Richard Sterling's dead wife? Didn't she die in childbirth 2 years ago? And then she appeared. She stepped out from the shadows at the top of the stairs. She wasn't the pale, dying woman Richard had left in the ICU. She was a vision of power. She wore a dress of crimson silk that hugged every curve of her body, a slit revealing a toned leg. Her hair, once thinning from poison, cascaded down her back in glossy waves. Diamonds, Thorne family diamonds, glittered at her throat. But it was her eyes that stopped Richard's heart. They were cold, they were focused, they were looking right at him. The orchestra began to play a waltz, but nobody moved. The silence was suffocating. Elara descended the stairs, her heels clicking rhythmically on the marble. Click, 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 like the ticking of a bomb. Julian met her at the bottom of the stairs, offering his arm. Together, they walked through the parting crowd. The guests split like the Red Sea, gasps audible as they recognized her. They walked straight up to Richard and Isabella. Richard's face was the color of ash. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. "Hello, Richard," Elara said. Her voice was smooth, rich, and utterly devoid of fear. "Elara," Richard choked out, his hands trembling violently. "But you died. The hospital. The obituary." It's amazing what money can buy, isn't it? Ilara smiled, a sharp, dangerous thing. You taught me that. You paid to have me moved to the garbage elevator. I paid to have my death faked. I'd say I got the better deal. Isabella Vane looked between them, her eyes wide. Richard? Who is this? You told me your wife died of cancer. I am his wife, Ilara said, turning her gaze to Isabella. Technically, I'm his widow. Or maybe he's the widower. It's legally complicated, but don't worry, Isabella. You can have him. I'm just here for what's mine. What? What do you want? Richard stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. If it's money, I can write you a check. We can settle this quietly. Ilara laughed. The sound was genuine, terrified him more than her anger. A check? She stepped closer, invading his personal space. She smelled of jasmine and vengeance. Richard, I don't want your money. I have Julian's money now, and I have my own. Phoenix Holdings just bought the controlling stake in the logistics company that supplies Sterling Dynamics. As of this morning, I own your supply chain. Richard's knees buckled. You can't. I can. And I did. Ilara leaned in, whispering so only he could hear. And Richard? I know about the thallium. The color drained from Richard's face so completely he looked like a corpse. I know you poisoned me, she whispered. I have the hair samples. I have the purchase orders. And I have the testimony of the cleaning lady you fired, who saw you spiking my tea. Richard staggered back, knocking into a waiter. A tray of drinks crashed to the floor, shattering the tension. The cameras flashed blindingly, capturing Richard Sterling, cowering before his dead wife. Enjoy the party, Richard, Ilara said, linking arms with Julian again. Try the crab cakes. They're to die for. She turned and walked away, the crimson train of her dress flowing behind her like a river of blood. Richard Sterling was left standing in a puddle of spilled champagne and broken glass, while the flashing bulbs of the paparazzi signaled the beginning of the end. Richard Sterling sat in his office on the 40th floor, watching his stock price tick downward in red numbers on his Bloomberg terminal. His PR team was in a panic in the conference room, but Richard wasn't listening to them. He was listening to his lawyer, a shark named Marcus Stone. She's alive, Richard, Marcus said, pacing the room. That voids the renunciation of assets. It voids the probate. But worse, if she proves you abandoned her, the public opinion will crucify us. She can't prove abandonment, Richard snapped, pouring a scotch at 9:00 a.m. I visited her. I have logs. She has Julian Thorne, Marcus countered. And she has the twins. Richard froze. The twins? We did some digging this morning, Marcus said, tossing a folder on the desk. She didn't lose the babies. They're alive. 2 boys, Leo and Orion. They're living in Thorne's Hamptons estate. They're 2 years old. A slow, grotesque smile spread across Richard's face. The fear from the night before was replaced by a new, calculating greed. Sons, Richard whispered. Heirs. Richard, don't, Marcus warned. Focus on the business. Don't you see, Marcus? Richard slammed his hand on the desk. This is how we win. The public hates a man who abandons his wife. But a father fighting for his children? That's a redemption arc. If I get custody of those boys, I look like the victim. I can spin it that Ilara kidnapped them, that she faked her death to steal my children. That is a dangerous game, Marcus said. Julian Thorne will come at us with everything. Let him, Richard sneered. I'm their biological father. The law is on my side. Draft the papers. I want full custody, and I want a DNA test to prove they're mine. 3 days later, the family court of New York. The courthouse steps were a zoo. Reporters swarmed the entrance. Richard Sterling arrived first, looking somber and repentant in a modest blue suit, holding a Bible for effect. He gave a brief statement about just wanting to hold his sons. Then the motorcade arrived. 3 black SUVs. Julian Thorne stepped out first, flanked by security. He reached back and helped Ilara out. She wore a sharp white suit, looking like a warrior angel. They didn't speak to the press. They marched straight into the courtroom. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy. The judge, an older woman named Justice Pendergast, looked over her glasses at the two parties. "Mr. Sterling," the judge began, "you are petitioning for immediate emergency custody of the minors, Leo and Orion Vance?" "Yes, Your Honor," Marcus Stone answered for him. "My client was led to believe his children died in childbirth. Ms. Vance kidnapped them and hid them for 2 years. Mr. Sterling has been denied his fundamental rights as a father." Richard wiped a fake tear from his eye. "I just want to be a dad, Your Honor. I missed their first steps, their first words, because of her deception." Ilara sat perfectly still, her hands clasped on the table. Julian's hand was resting protectively on the back of her chair. "Ms. Vance?" the judge asked. Ilara's lawyer, a fierce woman named Samantha Kane, paid for by Thorne money, stood up. "Your Honor, Mr. Sterling didn't lose his children. He left them to die. He signed a DNR, do not resuscitate, order for his wife, and demanded the hospital cut off life support for the infants because he didn't want special needs liabilities." "Objection," Marcus shouted. "Hearsay." "We have the documents," Samantha said calmly, sliding a stack of papers to the bailiff. "Signed by Richard Sterling, dated November 12th. He walked out of the ICU while his wife was in active labor." The judge flipped through the papers, her frown deepening. "Furthermore," Samantha continued, "Mr. Sterling is not fit to be a parent. We are countersuing for full termination of parental rights based on attempted murder." The courtroom gasped. Even the stenographer stopped typing. "Murder?" Marcus laughed nervously. "This is absurd. My client is a respected businessman." "We would like to enter into Evidence Exhibit C," Samantha said. On the courtroom screens, a video began to play. It was shaky footage, taken from a hidden camera inside a pantry. It showed Richard Sterling, 2 years ago, standing in his kitchen. He was holding a bottle of industrial cleaner, one containing thallium. He was carefully using a dropper to put the liquid into a carton of organic almond milk, the only milk Ilara drank during her pregnancy. Richard's face on the screen was clear. The bottle was clear. The act was undeniable. In the courtroom, Richard stood up, knocking his chair over. "That's fake. That's a deep fake. AI generated." "It was recorded by your housekeeper, Maria Gonzalez," Samantha stated, "who you fired and threatened with deportation if she spoke. Mr. Thorne found her. She's waiting in the witness room." Julian Thorne turned to look at Richard. He didn't say a word. He just smiled. A cold, terrifying smile that said, "Checkmate." "Mr. Sterling," Judge Pendergast said, her voice dropping to a register that shook the room. "Sit down. Now." "This is a setup," Richard screamed, losing his composure entirely. "She's a witch. She ruined my IPO. She's sleeping with him. Those kids aren't even mine." "Actually," Julian spoke up for the first time, his voice calm and deep, "we did the DNA test you requested, Richard." Julian slid a single piece of paper across the table. "The boys are yours," Julian said, "biologically. But blood doesn't make you a father. Love does, and you have never loved anything but money." Richard looked at the DNA results. Positive. They were his sons, and he had just tried to frame their mother for kidnapping while standing accused of poisoning her. "Bailiff," the judge said, slamming her gavel, "secure the courtroom. I am remanding Mr. Sterling into custody pending a criminal investigation by the District Attorney's Office regarding the attempted murder of Elara Vance." "You can't arrest me!" Richard howled as two officers grabbed his arms. "I'm Richard Sterling. I'm a CEO." "You're a criminal," Elara said softly, standing up. She looked him in the eye as he was dragged past her table. "And Sterling Dynamics? The board just called an emergency vote. You're out, Richard. You have nothing." As they dragged him out the side door, screaming obscenities, Elara felt a hand squeeze hers. She looked up at Julian. "Is it over?" she whispered. "The war is over," Julian said, kissing her forehead right there in the courtroom. "But our life is just beginning." But as they walked out of the courthouse, blinded by the flashbulbs of the paparazzi, a black sedan watched from across the street. Inside, a woman with dark sunglasses watched the scene unfold. It was Isabella Vane, and she wasn't looking at Richard. She was looking at Elara. "You think you won," Isabella whispered to herself, picking up a burner phone. "But you humiliated me, Elara. Richard was a fool. I'm not." She dialed a number. "Execute Phase 2. Target the twins." The media had dubbed it the victory of the century. In 48 hours, Elara Vance had gone from a ghost to a queen. Richard Sterling was rotting in a holding cell at Rikers Island, denied bail, his reputation shredded by the very evidence he had tried to bury. The stock of Sterling Dynamics had plummeted into freefall, only to be snapped up in a hostile takeover by Phoenix Holdings, Elara's company. She had reclaimed her life, her name, and her ex-husband's empire. But victory is a dangerous narcotic. It makes you feel invincible. It makes you believe the war is over, when often the enemy has simply changed shape. 3 weeks had passed since the courtroom triumph. The summer heat hung heavy over the Hamptons, a humid blanket that pressed against the glass walls of the Thorne estate. The Atlantic Ocean churned violently below the cliffs, grey and angry, signaling a massive storm front moving in. Julian Thorne stood by the front door, his luggage waiting. He checked his phone, a frown creasing his forehead. "I don't like this," he murmured, looking out at the darkening sky. "The Tokyo market is unstable. I have to go stabilize the acquisition. But leaving you here, it feels wrong." Elara walked over to him, smoothing the lapel of his coat. She looked radiant, her health fully restored, but there was a softness in her eyes, reserved only for him. "Julian, you're flying on a private jet to a secure boardroom. I'm staying in a fortress designed to withstand a siege. We have Marcus, we have the perimeter guards, and we have the state-of-the-art security system you designed yourself. We are safer here than anywhere else on Earth." Julian sighed, catching her hand and kissing her palm. "I know. It's just instinct. Call me if the wind so much as rattles a window pane." "Go," she smiled, pushing him gently toward the waiting car. "Build our empire. I'll be here with the boys." She watched his taillights fade into the mist of the driveway. As the heavy iron gates swung shut, locking with a reassuring clank, Elara felt a strange shiver crawl up her spine. She told herself it was just the drop in barometric pressure. By 9 p.m., the storm had arrived. Thunder shook the foundations of the house, rattling the panoramic windows like a giant's fist. Rain lashed against the glass in sheets. Elara was in the nursery wing on the second floor. The room was a sanctuary of soft blues and warm creams. Leo and Orion, now active toddlers, were finally asleep in their cribs, clutching matching plush lions. Elara sat in the rocking chair, reading a book by the glow of a small lamp. The peace was absolute, a bubble of warmth amidst the raging storm outside. Then, the world ended. It didn't happen with a bang, but with a sudden, suffocating absence. The lamp flickered once, and died. The hum of the central air conditioning cut out. The baby monitors went black. Darkness swallowed the room. Ilara froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A power outage? In a storm this bad, it was possible. But Julian's house was a marvel of engineering. The backup Tesla Powerwalls should have kicked in within milliseconds. There should have been no interruption. She waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. The power didn't come back. She reached for her phone to call Marcus, the head of security stationed in the gatehouse. She glanced at the screen. No service. Ilara stood up slowly, the book sliding from her lap to the floor. The silence in the house was heavy, unnatural. It wasn't just a blackout, it was a blackout combined with a signal jammer. "Mama?" Leo's small voice piped up from the crib. The darkness had woken him. "Shh, baby." "It's okay," Ilara whispered, moving quickly to the cribs. Her maternal instinct, honed by 2 years of hiding, shifted instantly into survival mode. This wasn't a storm. This was a hunt. She heard a sound from downstairs. It was the distinct, shattering crash of laminated safety glass. Not just one window, but several. Crash, crash, crash. Simultaneous breaches. Then came the sounds that chilled her blood. Fut-fut. 2 soft, compressed coughs. Silenced gunshots. That was Marcus. That was the night guard. Ilara didn't scream. She didn't panic. She scooped Leo up in her left arm and Orion in her right. They were heavy, dead weights of sleepy confusion. "We're playing the quiet game," she hissed into their ears, her voice trembling but firm. "Like hide and seek. Don't make a sound." She moved toward the walk-in closet. Julian had shown her the panic room, concealed behind the false back of the shoe rack. It was ballistics rated, had an independent oxygen supply, and a hard line to the police. If she could just get there. She reached the closet door. Her hand touched the handle. Boom! The heavy oak door of the nursery didn't just open, it was kicked off its hinges. The wood splintered with a deafening crack. Ilara spun around, backing into the corner, shielding the boys with her own body. 3 shapes filled the doorway. Men. Huge, dressed in tactical black gear, faces obscured by balaclavas. Rainwater dripped from their uniforms onto the plush carpet. They held assault rifles with practiced ease, but they stepped aside, walking through them, stepping delicately over the splintered wood in stiletto heels that cost more than a mid-sized car, was a woman. She wore a soaking wet trench coat, her hair plastered to her skull, her makeup smeared. But the gun in her hand, a sleek, silver pistol with a suppressor, was steady. "Isabella," Ilara breathed, the names tasting like ash in her mouth. Isabella Vane smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the baring of teeth by a cornered animal. "Hello, Ilara," Isabella said, her voice light, conversational, contrasting horribly with the armed men behind her. "You really are hard to kill. It's becoming incredibly annoying. Richard is in jail," Ilara said, her grip tightening on her terrified sons until her knuckles turned white. "The war is over. What are you doing here?" "Richard is an idiot," Isabella spat, the veneer of politeness vanishing. "He was a useful idiot, a stepping stone. He promised me a legacy. He promised me the sterling fortune. Instead, he got himself arrested, his assets frozen, and he let you, the dead wife, waltz in and take everything." Isabella took a step closer, raising the gun. "Do you know what happens to a woman in my social circle when her fiancé is exposed as a murderer and a fraud? I am ruined, Ilara. My father, the senator, won't take my calls. My credit cards are declining. I am the laughingstock of Manhattan." "You want money?" Ilara pleaded, calculating the distance between her and the nearest heavy object. "Take the safe. There's jewelry, cash. Julian keeps millions in the vault downstairs. Just take it and go." "I can't take the money while the heirs are alive," Isabella said coldly, gesturing with the barrel of the gun toward the weeping toddlers. Ilara's breath hitched. "They are babies. They have nothing to do with this." "They have everything to do with this," Isabella shrieked, her composure cracking. "As long as these two breathe, the Sterling Trust is locked down for their care. But if they disappear, and their heroic mother dies in a tragic home invasion gone wrong during a storm, well, the assets revert to the next of kin. And since I still hold Richard's power of attorney, and he is incapacitated, I can liquidate everything before the courts even realize you're dead." She nodded to the mercenaries. "Grab the brats. Kill the mother." "No!" Ilara screamed. As the first mercenary lunged forward to rip Leo from her arms, Ilara didn't freeze. She exploded. Adrenaline, chemically pure and fueled by a mother's rage, flooded her system. She dropped to one knee, setting the boys on the floor behind her. "Run into the closet, now!" she screamed. The mercenary reached for her. Ilara grabbed his outstretched wrist, twisted her hips, and used his own momentum against him. She drove her elbow up, smashing it into his throat. He gagged, stumbling back. She wasn't a soldier, but she had spent 2 years training in Krav Maga for this exact moment. She grabbed a heavy brass lamp from the side table and swung it with both hands. It connected with the side of the man's helmet with a sickening crunch. He went down. "Get her!" Isabella screamed, backing away. The second man rushed her. He didn't shoot. The room was too small, and Isabella wanted the kids alive. He tried to tackle her. Ilara sidestepped, but he caught her arm. He was strong, far stronger than her. He slammed her against the wall. Pictures shattered. Drywall cracked. Ilara gasped. The wind knocked out of her. She clawed at his eyes, fighting like a wildcat. She managed to kick his knee, forcing him to loosen his grip. She dove for the gun the first mercenary had dropped. Her fingers brushed the cold metal of the rifle. Crack! Pain exploded in the back of her head. Isabella had stepped forward and whipped the heavy pistol across Ilara's skull. White light blinded her. Ilara crumpled to the floor, the room spinning violently. Her limbs felt like they were made of lead. She tried to push herself up, but her arms wouldn't cooperate. Through the haze of concussion, she saw the men dragging Leo and Orion out of the closet. The boys were screaming, their tiny legs kicking, calling for her. "Mama! Mama, wake up!" "Shut them up," Isabella ordered, holstering her weapon. "Take them to the boat. The weather is getting worse, and we need to be in international waters by dawn." "What about her?" one of the mercenaries asked, nudging Ilara's prone form with his boot. "Put a bullet in her." Isabella looked down at Ilara. Blood was matting Ilara's hair, running down into her eyes. She looked broken, defeated. "No," Isabella sneered. "A bullet is too quick, and bullets leave ballistics evidence." She reached into her trench coat and pulled out a road flare. She cracked it, and the room was instantly bathed in a hellish, hissing red light. She tossed it onto the pile of plush bedding in the cribs. The synthetic fabric caught fire instantly. The flames licked up the curtains, hungry and fast. "Let the fire finish the job," Isabella said, turning toward the door. "Make it look like a lightning strike caused an electrical fire. I want her to wake up and smell the smoke before she dies. I want her to know she failed." Ilara tried to speak, tried to grab Isabella's ankle, but her hand just twitched uselessly on the carpet. "Goodbye, Ilara," Isabella whispered. She walked out, the mercenaries following with the screaming children. Ilara lay alone on the floor. The heat was already rising. The smoke began to pool at the ceiling, thick and black. The sound of the crackling fire replaced the sound of her children's voices. She was drifting away. It would be so easy to close her eyes, to let the darkness take her. No, the thought was a spark in the void. They have my sons. Elara Vance dug her fingernails into the carpet. She dragged her body forward, inch by agonizing inch. She wasn't dying tonight. If she had to crawl through hell itself, she would not let that woman take her children. The wolf inside her woke up, and it was hungry for blood. Elara woke up coughing. The heat was unbearable. The nursery was an inferno. The curtains were gone, replaced by walls of orange flame. "Leo! Orion!" she rasped, trying to crawl. Her head pounded. Blood ran down into her eyes. She had to move. She had to survive. She dragged herself across the floor, staying below the smoke. She reached the panic room panel. It was still working on an independent battery. She scanned her thumb. The door hissed open. Inside, there was an emergency satellite phone. She grabbed it and dialed the one number she knew by heart. "Elara," Julian's voice answered instantly. He was mid-flight. "I lost the security feed. What's happening?" "Isabella," Elara choked out, coughing violently. "She took them. The boys. She set the house on fire. Julian, save them." "Get out of the house, Elara!" Julian roared, a sound of pure terror. "I'm turning the jet around. Stay on the line." "I'm going after them," Elara whispered. "No, Elara, you're hurt." She hung up. She grabbed a fire extinguisher from the panic room, blasted a path through the hallway, and stumbled out onto the balcony. The heat was searing, but the cool rain hit her face. She looked toward the private dock at the bottom of the cliffs. She saw the lights of a speedboat tearing away into the dark, choppy water. Elara didn't think. She ran. She jumped from the first-floor balcony into the pool below, dragged herself out, and sprinted toward the garage. Isabella thought she had won. But she forgot one thing. Elara wasn't just driving a car. She was driving a vehicle owned by a billionaire obsessed with security. Elara jumped into Julian's Aston Martin. She activated the pursuit mode. The dashboard lit up with a tracker. Julian had put GPS chips in the boy's shoes months ago, a paranoid measure that was now a lifeline. The dot on the screen was moving toward the old industrial shipyard in Brooklyn. 2 hours later, the shipyard was a graveyard of rusted metal and shipping containers. The storm was raging overhead. Elara's car screeched to a halt at the gate. She was dizzy, burnt and bleeding, but her eyes were focused. She grabbed a tire iron from the trunk. It was all she had. She saw Isabella's black SUV parked near a warehouse. Elara moved through the shadows, the rain washing the blood from her face. She heard voices inside the warehouse. "The boat is late!" Isabella was screaming. "I paid you for a clean extraction." "The storm is too bad, lady," a mercenary argued. "We can't cross the Atlantic in this." "Then dump them here," Isabella shrieked. "I don't care. Just get rid of them." Elara peered through a crack in the metal wall. Leo and Orion were tied up on a wooden pallet, shivering, terrified, but alive. Elara gripped the tire iron. She was about to charge in, a suicide mission against 3 armed men, when the roof of the warehouse suddenly shattered. Crash! Glass and metal rained down. A figure dropped from the skylight on a rappel line, landing in the center of the room with the force of a thunderclap. It was Julian. He hadn't waited for the jet to land. He had taken the chopper. And he wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing tactical gear. He didn't speak. He moved like a blur. Before the mercenaries could raise their weapons, Julian shot the first one in the leg and the second in the shoulder. The third man charged him with a knife. Julian disarmed him with a bone-breaking twist and kicked him across the room. Isabella screamed, grabbing Orion and holding her gun to the toddler's head. "Stop!" she shrieked. "Back off, Thorn, or I paint the wall with him." Julian froze. His chest was heaving. His eyes were glowing with a demon's rage. "Let him go, Isabella, you're done!" "I'm leaving," she yelled, backing toward the water, dragging the crying child. "I'm taking the boat. If you follow me, he dies." Julian raised his hands. He was the most powerful man in New York, but he was helpless against a gun to his son's head. Isabella stepped onto the wet metal of the dock. She smirked. "Say goodbye to Daddy." She was so focused on Julian that she didn't see the shadow rising from behind the crates to her right. Elara didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. She swung the tire iron with every ounce of strength she had left. Crack! It connected with Isabella's wrist. The gun flew into the dark water. Isabella howled in pain, dropping Orion. Elara tackled her. Both women went crashing onto the wet concrete. Isabella was younger and uninjured, but Elara was fighting for her cubs. Elara rained blows down on her, punching, scratching, screaming out years of pain, years of betrayal. "That is for my sons!" Julian rushed forward, scooping up Leo and Orion, shielding them from the sight. "Elara, enough!" Julian shouted, grabbing Elara's waist and pulling her off. "She's done! Look at me! She's done!" Elara collapsed into his arms, sobbing, her knuckles bruised and bloody. Isabella Vane lay unconscious on the dock, the rain pooling around her ruined dress. Sirens wailed in the distance. The NYPD, led by the commissioner himself, a friend of Julian's, was breaching the gate. Julian dropped to his knees, pulling Elara and the twins into a crushing embrace. "I've got you. I've got all of you." 5 years later. The patio of the Villa Thorn in Lake Como, Italy, was bathed in golden sunlight. Richard Sterling sat in the common room of Rikers Island Penitentiary, staring at the small TV mounted in the corner. He looked 20 years older. His hair was white, his face lined with bitterness. He was serving 2 consecutive life sentences for conspiracy to commit murder and fraud. Isabella Vane was in the women's wing, serving 30 years. On the TV screen, a news program was airing a special, The Titans of Philanthropy. And finally, the reporter said, we look at the incredible work of the Vance Thorn family. The screen showed a beautiful scene, a massive garden party. There was Elara, radiant in a summer dress, laughing as she cut a ribbon for a new children's hospital wing. Beside her stood Julian, looking at her with a devotion that made the camera lens seem intrusive. And running around them were 4 children. Leo and Orion were 7 now, tall and handsome, looking like miniature versions of the man who raised them. And chasing them were 2 younger toddlers, a girl with Julian's dark eyes and a boy with Elara's smile. The reporter continued. When asked about the secret to their success, Mrs. Thorne had this to say. The camera zoomed in on Elara. She looked directly into the lens. "Success isn't about the money you hoard," she said, her voice steady and kind. "It's about the people you protect. I was left for dead because I was considered a liability. I was saved by a man who saw me as an asset. But in the end, we learned that love is the only currency that never devalues. And karma? Well, karma is a good business partner." Richard watched the screen. He saw the sons he abandoned, hugging the man he hated. He saw the wife he tried to kill happier than she had ever been with him. The guard walked by and tapped the glass. "Sterling, visiting hours are over." "Not that you have any visitors." Richard turned off the TV. The screen went black, leaving him with nothing but his own reflection. Back in Italy, the sun set over the lake. Julian poured 2 glasses of wine and sat next to Elara on the balcony. "Happy?" he asked, taking her hand. Elara rested her head on his shoulder, listening to the laughter of their children echoing from the garden below. "More than happy," she whispered. I'm alive. And that, my friends, is how the ledger of life balances itself out. Richard Sterling thought people were disposable. He thought money could buy silence, and that power justified cruelty. But he forgot the most important rule of business and life. When you invest in betrayal, the returns are always bankruptcy. Julian Thorne didn't just save Elara because he hated Richard. He saved her because he knew the value of a human soul. In the end, Richard sits in a cage of his own making, while the family he threw away built an empire of love without him. It's a reminder to all of us. Treat the people in your life like treasures, not transactions. Because when the chips are down, money won't hold your hand, but love will. What did you think of Elara's revenge? Did Richard get what he deserved, or was jail too good for him? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story moved you, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more dramatic stories of justice, karma, and romance, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Until next time, keep your head up and your heart open. Thanks for watching.